What kinds of insurance coverage could be available for your Illinois car accident claim? Hi, I'm Josh Rorscheib. I'm a personal injury lawyer in Central Illinois. And in this video, I'll talk about three different general categories of insurance coverage that could apply for your car accident claim. The first category is coverage related to the at-fault driver. The second would be coverage under your own policies or your family's policies. And the third would be coverage provided by third parties that weren't directly involved in the accident. All right, first, we generally think of bringing a personal injury case against the at-fault driver and filing a claim against the bodily injury coverage on their insurance policy. So that's kind of like the first step. Second, if the damages are very high in a personal injury case and they are higher than the limits available under the bodily injury policy that the at-fault driver has, it's possible that the driver will have something called a personal umbrella policy, or a policy that protects them from liability claims that exceed the amount of their auto policy. In cases that we settle where we believe that the value of the claim exceeds the coverage available under the bodily injury policy, we typically ask the at-fault driver for an affidavit that would verify that there's no other coverage. And what we're really looking for in those cases is to determine whether or not there's a liability umbrella policy that could provide extra coverage for our client. All right, a third type of policy related to the driver would be a corporate policy or an employer's policy. So if did the accident arise while they were in the course of doing work for their boss? If so, you can pursue a claim against the employer's liability policies. And it's important to check for that because the employer is likely to have much higher insurance limits on a corporate policy than would typically be available under most automotive insurance policies. All right, next I'd like to talk about what kinds of insurance might be available under your own policies or policies that insure you that are coverage purchased by your family. So typically, actually in every case in Illinois, you have some insurance that's called uninsured motorist coverage. So uninsured motorist coverage would protect you if that at-fault driver had no insurance at all. Another type of coverage under your policy would be something called underinsured coverage. And well, I have a separate video on this if you'd like more information, but underinsured coverage is available to you in cases where the at-fault driver has lower limits than the value that would normally apply to your case, and in those cases, what you can do is try to recover the liability policy from the at-fault driver, and with the permission of your insurance company, if you take that, you can then pursue additional coverage on your own underinsured policy. So underinsured coverage is very important coverage to have in your policy to protect yourself from all the folks who drive around with no insurance at all or with very low insurance limits. A third type of coverage on your own policy is something called medical payment coverage, or sometimes it's referred to as MedPay. Now, MedPay is very helpful because it's paid out regardless of fault. It's usually paid out right away. The problem is typically MedPay limits are pretty low. So it might be $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. And in some cases, the medical bills can be much higher than that, but at least it's helpful to have medical payment coverage available. One trick we do in a lot of cases is, we try to have the medical payment coverage preserved. So it is applied after your health insurance pays, or maybe after your health insurance pays, and then we discount the remaining balances. Then we use your MedPay because it'll do you a lot more good than at that point in the process than being paid off at the top on your injury claim. Okay, a final thing to look for when you're looking at coverage related to your own policies would be coverage that you might not immediately think about. So you may be covered in addition to your own vehicle on a vehicle of a relative that you live with. I'll give you a couple examples. Very recently, I settled a case for a young woman who was still living with her parents kind of on weekends, but she was at college and they lived pretty close, so she'd go back and forth, and she had her own car and her own separate insurance policy, and she was hit by an uninsured driver. And in that case, we recovered her $25,000 uninsured limits that were the full limits of her policy. And initially, she thought that might be all the coverage available to her. But we realized she was still spending time and residing with her parents, and we checked to see what kind of coverage her parents had. And her parents had something called uninsured and underinsured limits of $50,000. And we were able to recover 25 from our client's own policy and then another 25 from her parents' policy. So knowing to look for that additional coverage helped our client recover an additional $25,000 for a settlement. I mentioned a couple cases because we have a second case in our office with a very similar fact pattern where a young woman lives with her mother, and we anticipate recovering the first layer of coverage from our client's policy, and then an additional layer of coverage from her mother's policy because it has coverage. Her policy includes coverage for any other resident relatives that live with her. So there'd be additional coverage available there, and our client ought to get the benefit of it because her mother's been paying those premiums to purchase that coverage. So it's important to know to look for that. All right, a third type of coverage, or third category of coverage, unrelated to the at-fault driver and that isn't coverage for you under your own policy, would be coverage through some third party. And the most common type of case where this might apply, unfortunately, are cases where the accident is caused by a drunk driver. So if a drunk driver had been drinking at a bar and they became intoxicated at that bar, went from the bar and caused the accident, we would look to recover from the bar's insurance policy. They'll have something called dram shop coverage. Unfortunately, there's a limit to dram shop coverage in Illinois. It's a little less than $80,000. But it's important to pursue that type of coverage as well in cases where there's a drinking and driving injury. Often those cases are very serious and you need every source of recovery you can find. In some other cases, we've seen cases where there could be a negligent entrustment where some third party who wasn't on the scene of the accident let someone use one of their vehicles and they caused an accident when they should have never given the driver the keys. It's possible, apart from just the auto policy, that third party may have an umbrella policy. So wanted to just mention that. This list is intended to be 100% exhaustive, but I think in this video we've covered most of the typical types of insurance coverage we see in car accident cases in Illinois. I think one of the big takeaways from this video is that it's a really good idea for you to consider having a free consultation with an injury lawyer just to get a little bit of help. Looking at the case and figuring out what potential sources of recovery might be available. Because if a lawyer, even in just a free meeting with you, can tell you to look somewhere for additional coverage you might not be aware of, that can make a huge difference in what the settlement to you looks like. And we're certainly happy to meet with you to talk about your case, happy to give you a free consultation. And if you have any other questions about car accident cases, we hope you'll check our website for information or give us a call, and we'd be happy to help you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video.